I don't really like the term avid outdoorsman. I simply prefer the term avid outdoors woman. I have been very fortunate to grow up in the woods of Florida and have spent a lot of my life outdoors in several parts of the United States. I have spent thousands of hours up here in the woods of northern Florida. I have also had over 20 big game animals on my license. I have heard the whoops and screams at night, and I do not think they are of human in origin. I have also seen what many believe to be the skunk ape, or Bigfoot, as you might call him. The first time was back in 1977, in a wooded area of Baldwin, right near the river, on the way to the Everglades. I was on a hike with my father to pick some mushrooms, while my mother and sister followed along in the car. It was late in the day, and I was tired from walking, so I decided to sit on a fallen log for a break. I sat on one end, and my father on the other. In front of me was a very shallow ravine, and it was in this area that I saw two animals. I could only see them about halfway up, as I only had a view of their backs. They were covered in hair. The first was dark brown and the second was black. They were leaning against a pine tree, eating what I now believe to be mushrooms in hindsight. I was scared by this sighting. I did not know what to do. And I nudged my father and said to him, "Look, are those monkeys? Are they eating mushrooms?" He told me, "They're not monkeys, you idiot. That's not what they're eating." He tried his best to downplay the whole issue, even though he had to have been seeing the same thing I was. He did not get up to have a look, and neither did I. We just sat there on the log, dumbfounded, watching them. In retrospect, there were a lot of things I should have noticed, but at the time, I was only a kid and young, and as such, I did not pay attention to more of the finer details. I would have to guess that the first ape was about 7 feet tall, and the second was probably about 9 or 10. They were both still large, but the black one was huge, very massive shoulders, chest, and thick arms. We watched them for about 10 minutes, and somehow my father was in complete denial. They must have picked up on our presence and left the area. We never saw them again. I told nobody about it. In fact, I did not tell anyone about it until many years later. Now let me clear this up. It's not like they were just standing right in front of us, putting on a show. They were off enough in a distance where we were kind of hidden, tucked away by the forest, so they had to have looked up at us to see we were there, and we kind of just had a perfect view, since they were sort of in a clearing. Another time, I was driving a friend down in Nocatee, near the St. Johns River at about 10 at night. We were driving along a wooded area, and by the way, this is farther in the future. I saw a large object in the road ahead of us. I stopped the car, and as I did, what I saw seemed to stand up, and I realized that it was not a man. I was within 10 feet of it, so I could see the bright red eyes, which I think were just reflections from my car light, much the same way a cat's does or a deer when you shine a light into their eyes. But I remember it being very scary, the face being hairless more than anything else, as well as its massive arms and shoulders, kind of like what I experienced as a child. I also remember that there was no way it could have just simply been a man in a suit. It was too big, and the arms and torso were massive. It was also a very dark brown. And by this time, my friend and I were scared to death. I quickly accelerated the car. We never told a soul about it. I thought about it, but was almost sure that it was a Sasquatch. However, now, I am 90% sure that I had a Bigfoot sighting. I wish I could be 100% sure, but I know what I saw just was not a man in a suit. I don't know if it is still around, but I still live in Jacksonville, and that other 10% of me is so skeptical because it's hard for me to process that part of reality that society and everyone around you tells you does not exist. Anyway, I've also been paying attention to the news more lately, and I'm a bit surprised that stories like this don't gain more attention. You hear things here and there about livestock being killed and torn apart, but unfortunately, those segments don't get very long. I know Florida is crazy for all kinds of things, cryptid sightings and paranormal. Also, a lot of the terror that went on down here between the natives and people taking over, but that's a different story. If anything, while I'm still skeptical, I try to keep my eyes much more open now. I'm 26 years old and have had a lifelong fascination with the paranormal of all kinds, cryptozoology included. I grew up outside of Fort Walton, Florida, which is located in northwestern Florida. In fact, most of northwest Florida is pretty rural, even today. We had the usual stories about the swamp ape, Bigfoot, and other mysterious creatures, but none of them seemed to strike a chord with me until the Jersey Devil. From the ages of 8 to 14, I was heavily into books on the paranormal and cryptozoology. I could not get enough information on the subject. It was a fascination at first, but soon became an all-consuming passion. As I aged, I actually became a BFRO field investigator and have spent the last 5 years in the field investigating reports of potential Bigfoot activity in the state. As I got older, the Jersey Devil seemed more like a real creature and not just folklore. I've followed many cryptid researchers in my time and have been a fan of your show since the beginning. I truly thank you for all the hard work you've put into your show, especially the research you put into each and every episode. Now, to my experience. While I was in the Army, for about 6 months, I was stationed at Camp Blanding in Florida, which is roughly about an hour west of Jacksonville. In fact, most of northern Florida is very rural and wooded with lots of swamps and bayous. Camp Blanding is located in a very rural area, surrounded by a lot of woods and swamps. I was assigned to a computer operations battalion, which is not very populated, and only a few people were even in my section. We had to make sure that all the computers in the battalion operated at 100% capacity, and we had to respond to maintenance issues as they arose. I'd been on duty for about 10 hours, and I was a bit tired, so I opened the barracks door to cool off for a bit. I had planned to go to my room and rest for a few minutes, then go back to work. In the barracks there was just a hallway that led from the front door. To the left was the office and commander's room, which was to the right. For some reason, I turned right and made my way to the end of the hallway. If you've ever been inside a barracks, you know that there is a door at the end of each hallway. I stood at the door, looking outside, though I still don't know why. As I was standing there, the door was close enough so that I could prop it open with my foot. I looked out and saw a clearing in front of me. The only thing around was a smaller tree. I was looking at a tree and I swear, I'm not making this up. This small brown head popped out from behind it, and I immediately felt very cold and shaking with fear. I know that might sound like an exaggeration, but this feeling came over me that I can't quite describe. This creature was about 3 to 3.5 feet tall, big red eyes, a devil-like nose, very exaggerated features and bat-like ears, and was small and kind of more pudgy. It took a couple of steps from behind the tree, crossed the clearing, and went into the woods on the other side. The creature's steps were very loud and very unnatural. I believe it must have had legs that were attached to a short, stocky body. The way it walked, it seemed like it had a very long, strong legs. It's very difficult to explain. It had small but stocky arms, and I didn't see anything that looked like a tail. The best way to describe it was a small brown-skinned Batman. The fact that it crossed the clearing the way it did, the mismatched sounds it made when it took steps, and the way it seemed to disappear into the woods, all made me believe this was simply impossible for it to be a human in a costume. I immediately went and told my commander, who thought I was crazy. I believe he thought I was pulling an April Fool's prank, though it wasn't in April. I had nobody else to tell, and I was in a very rural area with no urban areas for about 50 miles. Basically, I was screwed. I had to go back to my normal life with nobody to confide in. I've told few people about my encounter, but I'm not sure if they believe me or not. I just got the show's email today, so I decided to share my experience with you. I've not told anybody else this story because people would think I was crazy. All I can tell you is that I've seen many strange things in the woods, but none of them were as big or strange as the thing I saw that day at Camp Landing. I'm a big-time Bigfoot enthusiast. My wife and I caught a glimpse of one 2 years ago in the Apalachicola National Forest here in northern Florida. This past Tuesday, on October 7th, I had the pleasure of seeing one again along with 2 other onlookers. I was deer hunting in the same national forest near Pinhook Swamp Road. I was dragging a fresh deer kill to our vehicle when I looked up and seen a large, dark, hair-covered creature standing upright and erect, looking at us from behind a cypress tree. It was roughly 80 yards away, and its eyes were as dark as a pair of black bowling balls. It stood at 7 feet tall. I have also been a police officer for more than a decade. I have seen more dead bodies than I care to remember. I have seen more weird things than I care to remember. This thing was the last thing I ever expected to see. I was so amazed that my mouth hung wide open. I looked at my hunting buddy who was standing right there next to me and said, "Did you see that?" And he just said, "I don't know what it was, but I've never seen anything like it before. I do not want to see it again." So, I've been telling people about it ever since. I've hunted the national forest of this area all my life. I don't want to admit it, but I've seen some things that seem unexplainable. Dismembered and bodied deer, bear heads, hordes of butterflies around corpses, which was very strange, frogs, huge snakes, and now this thing has me shook to the bone. It makes me wonder if there's a whole family of them in this area. I'll let you know if I ever encounter it again. I want this to be taken seriously. I want people to know of my experience, and I'm sure others will want to share similar stories. Thanks for listening. I'm a truck driver who has been roaming the highways of America since 1979. Those who know me can personally vouch for my veracity in the grand scheme of life and the fact that I'm not an inveterate liar, nor am I a compulsive fantasizer. As a matter of fact, I'm a big wolf fan and keep up on all the activities involving these magnificent creatures. I've been in awe of these things since before I even knew wolves existed, at least the large ones that we commonly know to as dire wolves. I still retain the memory of seeing my very first wolf man in my hometown of Quincy, Florida, back in June of 1980. It was a Friday night, around 11 p.m. I was an 11-year-old boy, riding my bicycle back from a small neighborhood convenience store called McCoy's. I just purchased some Hostess cupcakes. I can remember it like it was yesterday. I also got a couple of cream sodas to enjoy back home. I was approaching my street after turning around a corner in the residential neighborhood when a man, or what I thought was a man, crossed my path about 20 feet ahead of me as I pedaled slowly and continuously in that same direction. My first impression was that it was somebody in a wolf costume, and they had not seen me riding my bike toward them. Then, my second impression was that it was somebody who was either mentally deficient or in some kind of mental or physical stress. This is because this man or wolf or creature was walking very carefully on the outside ditch with his back to me on his hands and feet. I did not see its face, but I did notice that it was wearing torn clothing, much the same way fantasy and pop culture depicts somebody who would turn into a werewolf how their clothes are torn. I'm not saying werewolves are real, but that's what this person looked like. As I watched it move quickly across the street, I have also observed that its fur was very long and shaggy, and its hips and buttocks were very pronounced, and that it seemed to kind of resemble a bear. This animal was definitely moving upright as it crossed the road and made no sound whatsoever, not even in its movements. So, I didn't say anything at the time, but the next morning, I asked my parents if any drugs were on the streets the previous night that would turn people into wolfmen. They looked at me strangely and thought I was weird for asking that question. I don't blame them. I could not get this animal out of my mind. Well, about 2 months later, I was again at the store buying a couple of items. I had to cross the street to get back to my house as I rode my bike slowly through traffic and noticed this man lying on its stomach on the far side of the road. I again thought it was somebody who had maybe been drinking and fell into the ditch and could not get up. This time, I did see the face, and it was definitely human. I parked my bike and crossed over to the ditch to see if I could help him. He was and in tattered, ripped up clothing. He seemed very dirty. I suspected he was homeless at the time, but now that I look back on this, I'm not so sure. He also was very hairy and unkempt. And at the time, I kind of sneered and snickered to myself, thinking that he was the Wolfman. But he just kept giving me funny looks. I'm not sure why, like he knew me or something. Anyway, once I helped him up, he was kind of rude and didn't even really thank me. He just kind of ran off. He kind of seemed weird. But now, all these years later, I wonder if he was indeed the Wolfman, or I guess not a werewolf, but a shapeshifter. While I don't believe the traditional werewolf stories of somebody changing under a full moon, I do believe that people, through the use of black magic and satanic rituals, can shapeshift into demonic beings, like a werewolf, or, in this case, a giant upright walking wolf. As I've stated before in the very first part of the story, I've been a huge fan of direwolves since my brother would read me fantasy books at a very young age. So I think that's one of the reasons why this stuck with me so much. After this happened, I never did see that man again. In fact, that was really the last of my strange encounters. So I hope you enjoy that story for the time being. Thank you. I have some stories as a child that are vivid as yesterday's events. I began hunting hogs and deer and birds at the age of 10. I'm now 62, and have hunted and fished virtually almost always since I was 10. I am obsessed with the outdoors. I also have a very keen sense of smell, sight, and hearing. I can tell you where a hog went, or a buck, or even a fish. I'm just kidding, I'm not that good. I've also found a prehistoric bird's nest, or what I believe to be at least. And my grandfather apparently found a giant hog skull from the Long Pine Key, found right around 1927. Apparently it had horns on it. He's also chased panthers, and has seen red-eyed bipedal canine. I'm not crazy. I'm not on drugs. It appears to run in my family. And like him, I believe I've also seen a werewolf. I was driving to my sister-in-law's house on a dark road toward home, in my little red sedan, with my daughter and a friend in the 1970s, near Florida. This is right before I moved to Pasco County. As I was driving down a straight road, with a full moon and bright stars, I saw something large crossing the road in front of me. I assumed at first it was a Florida panther, because of the long tail, and then I thought that it looked completely different, and not like that. It was reddish-brown, more canine, and I could see its muscles. As it moved quickly, hunched over, you could see its hind legs and the incredible muscle definition. I don't mean to be strange, but it was beautiful, and so fast, and I was amazed, not scared or in shock. Sure, I was a little shocked at what I was seeing, but the magnificence of such a creature. It was about 70 yards away, I estimate, when it crossed. At this point, I was close to my sister-in-law's house, so I turned around to look for it again. I drove back about a quarter mile, looking in both directions for the panther or wolf or whatever it was, but did not see anything. I got back to my sister-in-law's house and told her what I saw. She told me that there are no panthers or wolves out here. I explained to her that there was a big reddish wolf or panther crossing the road in front of me, and she just said, "You were probably driving too fast and just imagine it." I explained to her I was only going about 50, slowing down to make sure it was safe to come around a bend. I knew what I saw wasn't a wolf or a panther. It was something else. Surprisingly, she heard me out, but I don't think she really believed me. That's okay, though. I don't think anybody would believe me after all. I still don't know what it was. I say it was a werewolf, but to be honest, it happened so fast, I didn't really get a good look at it. It was just a strange-looking large creature. But I can tell you, the size of it alone was beautiful, and the muscle definition, I'll never forget it. So I'm going to lean towards wolf. I'm very familiar with deer. I mean, I've seen just about every kind here of Florida animal out here in the woods. And I know wolves. This, though, was different. I'm currently 53. I'm a male, and I reside in northern Florida. My wife and I have lived at this particular location for about 3 years now. I have looked at many of the related websites involving cryptids, but in this particular account from the BFRO, I have been very interested in these particular encounters for a number of reasons. Was hoping you could do a show dedicated to these. Now, I have just this morning stumbled across 2 recent accounts that you might find of interest. The first is a sighting in 2010 by a man who was driving at night on Interstate 75 in Citrus County, Florida. The man states that he looked in his rearview mirror and saw what he thought at first was a very large bat, but then noticed it was also a very tall winged being. This was in the area where I actually live. I'm curious as to what it may have been. I use this same stretch of road quite frequently, and I'm always looking for stray animals. However, despite me looking, I have never seen anything like this. The second story involves a man from Lee County. This witness described seeing a red-eyed, beaked creature sitting in a tree. This is also in the same area where I am. I've heard some stories of strange activity in the woods and swamps, like the skunk ape, but nothing like this. I consider myself a skeptical believer. Although I do believe that there is much that we do not know, I won't believe everything. However, I believe that the so-called cryptids are very real, at least a handful of them. This particular case might be of interest because of the continuity of winged humanoids seen here in Citrus County. If you could discuss these on your show, I would be very grateful. I look forward to hearing back from you. I have lived in the same small town here in northern Florida since I was born. I've grown up in the woods and spent the majority of my life involved and surrounded by nature. I'm also a very active hunter and fisherman. But as of late, I've noticed an increase in paranormal activity in my area, specifically around my home. At first, I thought it was just maybe an increase of wildlife, but I'm not so sure it is anymore. Too many strange and bizarre occurrences. In fact, here's an example. I've noticed a few strange things on my property alone in the last couple months. Weird bird calls and howls and scratching sounds, metal dinging, strange howls that I've never heard before. All of this has really piqued my curiosity, so I've been trying to be more observant of my surroundings, more so than usual. If you're somebody like me and you're obsessed with the outdoors, you are already at peak level with your awareness, so I've kind of had to bump it up a couple of notches, because maybe my perception isn't as great as I think. I live right here in the middle of the woods, near a river. I'm also a night owl, and I enjoy being outside in the early morning hours, staying up late. I love to sit on the front porch at night, look at the stars and sip on coffee. So, the other night, I was on my front porch, looking up at the stars when I noticed movement in the trees, right in front of me actually. I was trying to figure out what it was, thinking it might be a black bear. And then I realized it was not a bear at all, because it was not walking on all fours, but rather 2 feet. Immediately, this freaked me out. Now before I go on, yes, I'm aware that black bears can stand up on 2 legs and can move, but not like this. The movement was so fluid and natural. I know for a fact that bears do not move like that on 2 legs. I went inside the house. I had heard through the grapevine that apparently there was a lot of Bigfoot activity in the panhandle of Florida, so I thought maybe that's what this was. The next day, I would sit in my backyard during the day and try to confirm what I saw the night before was in fact a Bigfoot. So that afternoon, I sat in my backyard, waiting for the sun to set. I have a dense tree line directly behind me, maybe 250 to 300 yards. I also have a narrow creek behind my backyard, maybe another 100 yards, and a larger swamp behind that, maybe another 100 yards. As the sun was setting, I heard some very loud but distinct wood knocking. I've made wood knocks before myself, but this was different. It sounded like somebody taking a large 2x4 and smacking it with incredible force against the base of a tree. It had a higher pitch and was more complex and tough to duplicate. I did not see anything else the rest of the night, but thought this would be a great opportunity to sit out there with my gun and fire some shots in the woods. Stupid, probably, but hopefully I was trying to let Bigfoot know to not mess around with me. I have heard that Bigfoot makes wood knocking sounds and also howls, that he lets you know when he's around. I know for sure he's out there, so I thought that this would be good. I went and got my .45 caliber handgun and started firing shots in the air. It got dark, but I was in the middle of the woods and can still faintly see from my lights. I heard some rustling in the creek, so I fired some more rounds in the sky. I heard a little more movement, and then I saw something big running from one side of the creek to the other, on 2 feet. It was moving very fast. I've been in the woods my whole life and I've never seen anything run as fast as that. I didn't see the face of it though, more the silhouette. It was taller than me for sure, and had very long, exaggerated arms. It kind of reminded me of a really large man, with just long arms, running away. That's when I knew I had the chance, that this was indeed a Bigfoot. I knew it was simply not an ape. This creature looked more human, at least in stature and size. I did not want to go into the woods that night, as I'm not good at tracking or trying to find this thing, and let alone did not want to be alone with that thing. Who knows what it would do to me if it decided to be aggressive. I was concerned that this thing would kill me. I left and went back inside. I'm now thinking of a plan to how I can guarantee to keep them away from my property, just in case they get violent. Anyway, that's my story. I'm not the only person to report things out there like this, and I don't know how many other people have seen it. I feel like this area has more than one of those things living here. I also don't want to forget to include that from my back porch, the woods are clear and sparse enough that you can actually see down into the creek from where the angle of my back porch is. So that's how I was able to see this thing, all those yards away. And when there's enough light outside, you can still see. In fact, there's many times that after 10 p.m., I could still make out the silhouettes of deer drinking from the creek all the way down there. Perhaps Bigfoot eat deer, and perhaps that's why it was at the creek. Maybe it was hunting deer. I don't know. Maybe it was hunting on my property. Maybe it was wanting to hunt me. This took place in mid-May 2014 in the Cherokee Creek Nation in the small town of Gore, Oklahoma. I was out at my uncle's house, who lives in Gore. We had been eating dinner and talking about the skinwalker and about how it was in the area. It was about 9:45, and we decided to go outside to see if we could see one. We went out on the front porch, looking around, but didn't see anything, thinking we might have heard something. Mind you, all of us are very avid believers of the skinwalker, and we really wanted to see one. So we went back inside the house. The eldest of our group, who was about 43, decided to go outside one more time, after swearing he could have heard something outside the house that wasn't normal. After about 5 minutes later, we heard a scream. We all jumped and ran outside. After turning on the lights and looking around, but not seeing anything, we called out to our friend, but he did not answer. We noticed that the light on the front of the house was on, but we did not remember turning it on. We went to the front door, unlocking it, going outside to see if he had gone out front, and there he was, all pale. His hair was all messed up, and he looked terrified. We asked him what had happened. He would not talk. We told him to come get in the truck and come home. He got in the truck, and his friends followed us in the vehicle. When I finally got him to talk, he said he saw it. He said it was on all fours and had red eyes. He said that it came out of the woods towards him and ran towards the house. He said he ran up the steps, unsure of what to do. He stood there for a few moments, then felt safe enough to open the door and come out. He said he knew we were out there, but did not want to come out for fear that we would see it. He is about 6'4" and 280 pounds. He said it was about 5 feet tall and had red eyes. He swears that what he saw was real, and he has not been drinking. He doesn't really drink much anyway. He is also a very spiritual person, so I believe he saw something out there. The next day we went out there and looked around with sunlight. There were 2 large sets of tracks by the door, and they looked as if something had been standing there and then quickly ran off. We did not see anything else. When we got back to the house, we had this eerie feeling left over, like something was watching us from the woodline, and that we were not alone. Maybe our desire to wanting to see this thing caused it to actually manifest and show itself. It makes me wonder. I could be wrong on this, but I would love to know your opinion and what you think. Thank you for taking the time to read this. In 1999, I was driving home from work just as the sun was going down. I was driving along a country road, a 2-lane road, no other cars in sight. I approached a long S-like curve on the straight stretch of the road that followed the S-curve. I was going at a normal speed, and a huge, dark, hairy creature started running alongside my car. My first thought was that it was a bear, but it wasn't a bear. It was a lot bigger, and was running on 2 legs bipedally, and also moving much faster than a bear. I was going about 40 to 45 miles an hour at the time, and it was running alongside my car. I was puzzled. I did not know what it was, and I was scared. I hit the gas, and it decided to bolt off into the woods. It was hands down the most frightening experience of my life. I never told anybody about it, because I thought nobody would believe me. Years later, I've tried to research it. I believe that what I saw that night was a skinwalker. It looked like a large bear, but it was acting more human. It acted like it wanted to scare me. That's what it looked like to me. I was only about 15 to 17 years old, and I lived in a very rural area of southeastern Oklahoma, in a town that had probably less than a 200 in population. It was night, and I had to get something from a warehouse about a mile outside of town. I was driving a rather powerful car for my age, I will say that. It was dark along the road, and I was about 3/4 of a mile away to my destination when I rounded a bend and saw what I thought was a deer standing in the middle of the road. I braked, but did not slow down as I approached what I thought was a deer. It started off standing at the edge of the road on the driver's side. It was facing my direction. I was almost even with it at this point, and as I got closer, it did not move. It was like a deer that was frozen in the headlights. I was only going about 30 miles an hour by this time, and at this point, my car was only a few feet from it. It then turned completely, its whole body, and looked right at me in the eyes. Its head was much larger and was gray. I think it was maybe 6 feet tall, if not more. I'll never forget the face. It was terrifying. It was deer, but also very human. I only saw it for a split second, but I saw its mouth open. I saw the teeth. I saw the eyes. It was as if it was letting me know how much power it had and how much it could do to me. I could feel the eyes bore into me, burning. I looked away, slamming on the accelerator. I looked again as I was passing it. It turned quickly, moving and disappearing out of sight. It had disappeared on the passenger side, and I caught a glimpse of it one last time. It was huge. The car was only about 12 feet from it when I was even with it, and I realized its arms were longer than I could imagine. I'm 6'2", and I know for a fact it was taller than me. As I passed it, it seemed to pace me for a few seconds before it pulled away, and it could go back into the darkness. I knew it was staring at me. Once I reached my destination, I could not get out of the car for a couple of minutes. I was shaking. I had never been so scared in my life. I was afraid that the car would not start again and this thing would come to get me. If not for that, I would have just turned around and gone home. I've never really told anybody about this, not even my family. They would have thought I was crazy. Almost 30 years later, I have finally told my adult children. I have an incredible respect for people who have these experiences. I've always wondered if it was something from this world or something from another. When I was staying on the Apache reservation with my grandparents when I was much younger, I heard a horrible howling sound. It was definitely not a wolf, coyote, etc. It reminded me of a wolf mixed with a human screaming and screaming. My grandfather informed me at the time that it was a skinwalker. I had never heard anything like it before or since, and I have heard coyotes, wolves, etc., and it was not any of these. I will never forget that sound. It was like the howling came from off in the distance, and then it got louder and louder. It almost gave me the impression that it was coming closer and closer. I cannot forget that horrible howling sound. It wasn't until a couple of weeks later that I found out that that was a skinwalker. It came to visit our house at the time. That night, my dad was out on the back porch smoking, which is a big no-no. If a skinwalker sees you, you will be cursed. Well, my dad was on the back porch and saw something coming around the corner of the house. It literally came out of nowhere. My dad saw it, and it was only about 30 feet from him. It had its head down, like it was grazing, he had described. When it saw my dad, it immediately looked up at him and had huge eyes. He said they were very much like an owl's. It was very tall, very skinny, and had long arms. It had huge hands, but the nails were very long and pointed like claws or like daggers. It disappeared very quickly in the opposite direction, but my dad went back inside. He knew it was still around. When my father told my grandpa what he saw, my grandpa informed him that it was a skinwalker, and it will probably lure around the house now. My dad still gets shaken up talking about it. I will never forget the sound or the sound of my dad telling his story. I am a Native American, and we know about the skinwalkers because it is well versed in our culture and our church. I even went to college to study sociology and anthropology. I hope to do a research on the skinwalkers. There are so many stories about them. It is a shame that so many people do not believe in their existence. I know they are there. My grandfather's family and my grandma's family have seen them on reservations. I will never forget the experience. I hope that anybody who reads this approaches it with an open mind. In the summer of 2012, I worked at the State Fair of Texas in the pony exhibit. I was in the barn currently, grooming one of the ponies. He was just snuffling around, doing his thing. I was in the corner of the stall, grooming the pony. When I looked up, you know how you just get that feeling, and you look up? That's what I had. And I saw what I thought was a pig, except it was black and not pink. Standing up on its hind legs, arms and hands on the bars, looking into the stall. I froze. Its ears were pointy and big, and its eyes were huge and almost human. They reminded me of a wild animal, but still very human, if that makes sense. I remember thinking, I can't believe I'm looking at a pig on two legs. I stood up, slowly, and backed out of the stall on the other side. I felt like I was being watched, and wanted to get away from it. And when I say being watched, I don't mean just by this thing, but all around me. I looked over at the next stall to see if there was anybody around. There wasn't. I was by myself. I looked over the other way, toward the barn door. Nobody coming in. I was screwed. I looked back and this pig man was gone. That was it. The ponies were fine. They acted weird, but nothing happened. I've gone there back to work at the fair. I do not want to see whatever that was again. It's possible that I experienced a shapeshifter of some kind. I don't know what else it could have been. It seemed to be more intelligent than an animal, but it wasn't like any animal I've ever seen before. I have nightmares about it. I've told very few people about what I saw. I don't want to be labeled as crazy, but I know I saw something bizarre. I felt like it was watching me. I don't know why. It was completely still though. It never moved. The only thing that happened when I looked at it was that the ears kind of twitched a little, like it was watching me curiously. I firmly believe that what I laid eyes on was a skinwalker. Hiking down in the canyon of the St. Regis River in the Adirondacks one night in early September of 2017, I witnessed a set of 3 or 4 lights moving down in the canyon below. Then a second set of 3 or 4 lights come up from below and then move down the left side of the canyon. Both sets passed within 50 yards of me, and I was wearing a headlamp. I shined my light down the ridge, then the other side of the creek. Both times I was able to see them for a few seconds, and both times I saw the same thing. These were human-shaped creatures that were roughly 8 to 9 feet tall and completely covered in this glistening pale blue fur. They were running very fast with a fluid-like motion, like a deer or buck running through the woods. Graceful, yet powerful. Terrifying, yet chaotic. This has been very hard for me to process. It was so bizarre. The first sighting was 3 or 4 of these creatures. I saw them move quickly down into the canyon below me. I saw their glowing blue bodies moving through the woods. I read on a website, which I can't remember, a guy had seen something similar in the same area about a year before. He said the same thing about them being covered in almost bioluminescent blue fur. Well, a week later, I was hiking in the same area and I heard the most blood-curdling scream, followed by this strange mechanical screeching nearby. I saw the same type of creature come up from the other side of the creek. I watched it for a few seconds, and then it moved quickly down the creek, never noticing me, thank God. It was too dark to see its features, but it was very humanoid in nature, and running and moving incredibly fast. Both times, I saw very similar characteristics, although not the same. The creatures were blue and glowing, 9 feet tall, easily, and incredibly fast. I heard a similar story of a guy who was walking through the woods and then chased by about 4 or 5 of these humanoids. Camping near the Chippewa Reservation, just outside of Rice Lake, Wisconsin. My brother and I had heard similar sounds to a siren, though it was not a siren. It is hard to describe the sound. It was very loud, high-pitched and almost mechanical, but still animal-like. The first day we heard it, we laughed, thinking maybe it was a wolf or an animal, but it seemed to be coming from a distance. It sounded strange, but we wrote it off. We had picked a spot to camp that was between 2 large creeks. We could hear the creeks, so when we heard the animal, it was to our right, not too far away. We guessed it was maybe 100 yards or so, but the sound had echoed. It was hard to tell. We lay down in our sleeping bags and tried to go to sleep, but the sound kept us awake. It was loud enough to wake us up a few times. It could not have been a wolf or a coyote, because it stayed in a pattern and was continuous. As I said, it was like a siren, but not. We eventually fell asleep. It was the last we heard of the animal. That night, though, we both awakened to what we could have sworn was the sound of our dead grandmother's voice, calling our names in the dead of night. It was very eerie, and made it hard to fall back asleep. It was distinctly our grandmother's voice, and we both heard it. She had been dead for a while. The next day, we took a hike to the top of the hill. We were surprised to see how near we were to the reservation. We could even see smoke far off, rising in the distance. We began hearing the animal noises. It was a loud scream, almost making me jump 10 feet in the air. This sound was different and indescribable. It sounded like something very big, almost like a giant woman screaming. It was similar to the sound we heard the night before, but different. It sounded larger. We could see that the sound was coming from a very large forest nearby, a ways into the res. We hurried off to the hill and came back to our camp. Later that night, we had heard the voice of our grandmother again. It sounded almost like a warning, as though we were in danger. We pretty much did not sleep at all that night. It is as though the animal got mad at us for hiking to the top of this hill because we kept hearing it. The morning was eerie. We decided to pack things up and just leave. We went to the Whitefish Dunes State Park near Lake Michigan. It was a beautiful drive. The sound was very loud and similar to the other sounds we had heard, though it did not. We were convinced this animal did follow us. We parked, walked along the beach for a while. It was about 4 p.m. by that time. We decided to settle in for the night. We had a tent trailer, so we decided to sleep in that. And my brother and I set up tent and drove the trailer into the woods to our left. It was dark by the time we got everything set up, so we sat by the fire, relaxed and talked until we heard the animal. It was to our left, coming closer. We could hear something large crunching through the woods, and it sounded very, very large. It was walking bipedally on 2 feet, and we knew it was a large, heavy man or something else. We tried to come up with every possible solution of what it could be. A wolf, a coyote, a bear, but nothing seemed to match the feet patterns. And after a while of the crunching, all the noise around us stopped, even the crickets. It was very, very eerie and scary. We felt like whatever it was watching us, right in the woodline. We were too scared to get up and go look and investigate, so we just went to bed. That night again, we had heard our grandmother's voice, although, even though we heard her voice, whatever she was saying was indiscernible. We were too scared. The trailer luckily had a solid wall, so whatever it was could not see in. The following morning, which I think we were so exhausted, we must have slept, we decided to pack up and go home. I had never seen my brother so shaken. Whatever it was had given us both vivid nightmares. The sounds, the mechanical sounds, the roaring and the howling, the siren noise. Out of all the animal sounds in the woods, this was so distant from anything that I grew up knowing. Whatever it was definitely big and fast, and I believe had a very evil, dark aura to it. I'm sure of it. We could hear it. There's no mistaking that it was not around. My speculation is that I think we had an encounter and had been followed by a skinwalker, since they seem to do things like this, follow you from location to location, mark you supernaturally, and imitate the voices of dead relatives or friends, or even living ones. Is there anything we can do to protect ourselves? My brother and I are too scared to tell anybody about this for fear of ridicule and embarrassment, so we thought we'd look online and see if there's anywhere we can seek advice or help for our situation. Thank you for taking the time to consider what we've had to say. I was stationed at Hill Air Force Base in Utah in 1971. I was assigned to the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing, 8th TFW, as a crew chief. My crew was assigned to the 26th Tactical Reconnaissance Wing. I was with the 26th TFW at Ubon RTAFB in Thailand in 72. My crew chief station was with the 8th in Thailand. While the 8th TFW in Utah, I saw a few strange things, both while in Utah and Thailand. While at Utah, I saw and heard a sighting in the desert. When I was a crew chief at Ubon, I had an experience. This occurred at night. You can refer to the story. I'm currently 74 years old, and my name is Harold. I'm a veteran of 2 wars. I write to you in good faith. I hope you will share my story. The one from Utah, I would not have written to you except for the sighting that I saw in the desert. This is the one that got me. I was in Utah for about 9 months. We're there. I was assigned to maintenance of an F-40 Phantom jet. One workday morning in October of 71. I was on a work call to fix a malfunction of the F-4D jet. I had a tool bag over my shoulder, wearing coveralls and on my way to the jet. I had to go to some way to get to the hangar of the jet. I went to the clearing, and the jet was in the desert. I had to go around to the front of the aircraft. Now, the location of the desert is flat, with some scrub brushes and cactus. I walked out on the outside perimeter of the jet wash. When I got to the front of the jet and began work, I was working for maybe about 2 hours fixing it. After what felt like 2.5 hours, I stood up and noticed that there was a large dog about 50 feet away from me. It was sitting on top of a hill and looked more like a large, scraggly coyote. But there was something different. I kept telling myself it's nothing to worry about. It stood up on its back legs, and immediately, I knew this was not a simple dog. The way it stared at me, and it moved in the direction of where I was standing. So I took off my pack, dropped my tool bag, and slowly backed away from the jet. I slowly began to panic. I moved to the rear of the jet, and then I ran to the front. I got to the end, turned around, didn't see it anymore, and started to run. I don't think I got more than 30 feet, and that's when the thing started to run after me. I took off running, ran up the hill away from the jet. So I took off going down the hill and got to the scrub brush. I was running and I was in such a hurry, I began to lose my balance. I got through the brush, got through it, and got through the cactus. When I went through the cactus, I ran over to the water tank. I got to the gate at the end of the water tank, flinging open the gate, banging against the wall. After I got it open, I ran into the first main building, going to the bathroom. Things were quiet. Nobody was in there at that time. I took a deep breath and let it out. I tried to catch my breath again, went to go look in the mirror and kept trying to convince myself I was okay. But I noticed my eyes and face were bleeding. I looked at my hands. They too were bleeding. I took a paper towel, wiping my face and hands, and started to feel very dizzy and disorientated. I felt sick. I went out to the hallway, leaned up against the wall, and began vomiting. 2 of my buddies came out and wondered if I was okay. They looked at me and saw that it was bleeding. They began to show great concern for my ailments and wondered what was wrong with me. I told them I'm not sure, that I started feeling sick. And by the way, the blood that was coming out of my hands was almost coming out of my pores. I had no visible cuts or flesh wounds on my hands or face, and yet I was just bleeding. Anyway, long story short, they weren't really sure what to do with me. They sat me down on a stool, had me calm down for a while and clean me up, and eventually I had to go speak to my chief, who was far down the hallway. He'd asked what happened to me, and I told him I fell. He didn't believe me. I told him I slipped and fell in the sand, and he asked me what I was doing to slip and fall. Well, I explained to him that I dropped something, and so we kind of bickered back and forth for an hour or so, something along those lines. Explained to him that I was fixing the malfunction. I knew if I told him about what I saw, there's no way he would believe me. Either that, or he would put me on leave. I could not risk that. I could not risk my military career at the time. After more bantering and back and forth, he sent me off. For the rest of the day, I went to my bunk, got some alcohol, and cleaned my face up even more. At that point, around 9 p.m. that night, I noticed I had deep wounds all over my hands and face, unlike where I did not before. I'm talking deep cut wounds, which I have no idea how I got. I never landed in the cactus, and I never did touch or do anything that would cause me to have these wounds. For the next few days afterwards, I would get these random bouts of nausea and feel very sick and dizzy. I almost wonder if that coyote, or what I believe now is a skinwalker, did something to me. I've told a couple native friends of this as time went on. They believe, and I mean firmly believe, that I was marked by a skinwalker. I'd love to know your opinions on this and if you think this is indeed truth. My girlfriend at the time is the only person I told for a long time. She did not believe me and claimed that what I saw was impossible. The only thing I know for sure is the desert does not welcome strangers. I'm a disabled veteran that has seen more than a few paranormal things during a childhood with memories I do not wish to share with anyone. I also never told my parents when they were alive because I probably would have been locked up in the loony bin. My parents probably think I'm a liar for this. I'll just say that I've been to the Skinwalker Ranch, although my encounters happened in New Mexico. I've had several personal experiences with what I believe were dogmen. Some were very close. I also grew up in the woods and knew most of the different types of coyotes. The ones I saw had different builds. They always walked or trotted on 2 feet with ape-like motions. I realize now that those were probably skinwalkers or shapeshifters. As a kid, I played in the shadows of the cliffs where they were known to climb, and back then, it was just considered folklore. I know how different and demented it sounds, but these beings exist. And if somebody were to go to the Apache land in New Mexico, to the cliffs where I've seen them, you would probably never be found again. I have heard their screams years after years. They are not your typical feral creature. They are much larger, much more intelligent, and far more dangerous than we can ever imagine. Stand your ground. Thank you. I was living in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and worked at a major retail chain for about 2 years. I lived about an hour away, so I lived in a little house in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. The house, my mom lives there now, is less than 10 miles from the power plant. After I worked at the major retail chain, the power plant is where I'd work. I'd leave at 5 a.m. and be at work by 5:30. I'd commute this way for well over a year, and sometimes in the dark. I'm not sure, but I think I actually saw a skinwalker once. I remember thinking that what I saw was weird and creepy and felt like I was being watched, which is strange because I didn't live in any near neighborhood. I'm sure it was weird because it was right by a major power plant. I've seen coyotes and mountain lions out there too, so I don't know what I saw. But I was on my way to work when it felt like something was watching me. After looking in my rear view, and instead of there being a car behind me, there was this person standing in the middle of the road in the dark. The headlights hit it just right, so I could not tell it wasn't a person. It was grayish white and skinny, but not like a person wasted away. It was standing straight up, and it was easily 7 or 8 feet tall, if not more. It had no hair, and its face looked like a cross between a wolf or a coyote and a person. I don't remember seeing ears. I know that probably doesn't help you much, but I thought I'd just figure to let you know that this has been going on out here. I also wanted to say that I kept driving, even though it creeped me out so much that I was shaking. I went to work, talked to my boss, who actually used to live out there himself. He claims that it was probably a skinwalker too. He told me to not let it bother me, and even though they are dangerous, if you protect yourself properly, they can be harmless. Just do your best to ignore them, and don't speak of them, and you'll be fine. I was at a place called the Dirty Devil River, located near the Amarillo Geyser. I was camping where I always do, the last mile to the geyser. I had flown over and brought my hiking pack with me. I hiked in a whole mile, setting up my tent in the same spot that I always do. A nice flat spot that takes roughly 15 to 20 minutes to get to. The next morning, I got out at daybreak and saw this wolf jumping up and running off. After that, I heard a scream like nothing I've ever heard in my life, nor have I heard since. This seemed to be coming from inside of a canyon to the north, but I thought it was a bull elk getting killed in the canyon because it was so loud in volume. It was the most horrifying noise I've ever heard. I had my eyes on the canyon for about 15 seconds when I heard and saw a large object hit the ground. This object I judged to be about the size of a Volkswagen Bug, and it flew up in the air about 40 feet from the canyon floor and came down about 20 feet from the canyon rim. The object was as large as I said, and it looked like a VW Bug, but it was covered in hair and was the color of silver. Colors might look a little bit different in the sunlight. I would say the color, though, was most likely silver. The hair was probably estimated to be about 2 inches long, but it flew an estimated 100 feet and probably was heavier than a car. I hope you can find somebody that knows how to figure out how to measure that distance, and maybe you could figure out what flew over my tent. I was scared. I don't believe in Bigfoot, but I know for a fact Bigfoots are not that big and they do not fly. Afterwards, I went about my regular routine, made breakfast, and then went to the geyser to get some water. I guess the creature went to the canyon over because I did not see it. although I heard screaming and yelling like I'd never heard before. I think I was hearing a pack of these creatures screaming, but I'm not sure. They kept yelling until they all moved off. I heard them moving down the canyon, moving off over the next ridge and up a canyon to the east. I did not follow. I wanted nothing to do with them. They scared the heck out of me, and I was alone. I camped there for another night. The next day, I went into the canyon where it came from, looked around but did not find or see anything. I didn't look around very well because I did not want to spend the time. It was eerie. I also did not see any tracks, but I could see some indentation of large gargoyle-like feet where this object or thing had hit the ground. It was about the size of 19 inches long, roughly, and maybe 9 or 10 inches wide. I should have made a casting, but I did not have the proper equipment with me. I just wanted to make sure that I was not hallucinating or anything, but I guess I wasn't. The creature that I saw, which I'll try and describe as best I can, looked like a giant bat, or something along those lines. Easily as big as a car, as I've already stated, but ultimately, due to the lighting, it was more of a silhouette than anything, and looked more like a large blob of an object, slightly resembling that of a bat or some sort of person. It's hard to exactly make out what it was, but whatever it was, I have a feeling it was either alien or supernatural. I'm pretty sure that what I had encountered that evening was a skinwalker. I was in my former home and state, now living in a new town. It was about 2 years ago, at around 2 a.m. The only people inside were me, my girlfriend, and her young son. My girlfriend went downstairs to use the bathroom, and I stayed up to watch YouTube and play video games on my PS3. While doing so, I was playing rhythm games on the Vita, but I had my headphones connected to the PS3. I presumed that my girlfriend was up on the main floor because I heard her talking to me, but when I replied, nothing had happened. Thinking that I misheard her, I said her name repeatedly but got no response. I tried Skyping and texting her, but nothing. And then for some reason, I picked up the phone and called her. I heard it ringing, and she was now downstairs, and was in fact using the bathroom when I called. I ran downstairs and asked her if she had called me, and she said that she had been in the bathroom the entire time. I told her what had happened, and she said that she probably heard me playing and thought I was talking to her. I've never been more confused and scared in my life. It could have been that I was hearing things, but I don't think so. She is my girlfriend, and I know her voice extremely well. It wasn't her. This happened a couple of years ago, and I still think about it. And now, tonight, around 2 a.m., I was watching a video on YouTube and laughing with my girlfriend on the phone. When I paused the video, I heard a very low voice say, "I'm here." I paused the video and told my girlfriend that I just heard a voice say something. She acted very concerned, asked me to send her the playback. So I did, and nothing was there. I played it again, and this time, I heard the voice less clearly. Then, I paused the video again, replayed it, and there it was. "I'm here." I didn't send the playback to my girlfriend before pausing the video because I wanted her to experience it for herself. This was not my imagination. I know what I heard. I just don't know what it was. Something is imitating the voice. I'm sorry if this story is confusing. I have a hard time writing it down. Hopefully you can make sense of it. I'm not sure if you know about the skinwalker stuff that goes on down here in Southern California, but I've heard a few people who've experienced it. And as somebody who knows these 3 people, I know they do not want to discuss it really. So I'll kind of tell you what I know. One guy I know, he worked at a movie theater, and he said one night they were getting ready to close up. And by the way, this was many, many years ago. He observed the big projector room door being slammed and kicked repeatedly from the inside of the room. Thought it was a poltergeist. It sounded like whatever was in there was very aggressive and angry. He said some other people working there thought that his coworker was in there. Then he heard a voice coming from inside, calling his name, but in this thunderous, deep, raspy voice. He said he was terrified, and at some point saw a shadow person with a human-shaped outline, very black but no discernible facial features, again, looking like the shadow of a human, at the end of the door, standing there, trying to get him to come in. Terrified, he had also heard a high-pitched scream, and a low, deep moan at the same time coming from the room. He's not exactly sure what that's about. Now, the rabbit hole gets a little bit deeper. Come to find out that whole area of town, I won't say which, where the movie theater was built, and several other small businesses apparently have a host of paranormal and strange activity, right? Well, come to find out that they were all built on native cursed land. The only verification I have for that is a couple of Apache friends who do not know each other, but they both say the same thing about that section of land, and I've also heard stories from other small business owners in that area claiming to see strange things. Shapeshifters, dark shadows, strange noises, all sorts of strange sensations and experiences as well. All of them unexplainable, and ultimately, paranormal in nature. Apparently, from what I know, a dark native entity or spirit had attached itself to that movie theater. As cheesy as that sounds, its sole purpose is to do harm and enact revenge, or so I'm told. And then another guy I know claims that he'd seen a raccoon shapeshift into a feral-looking man. This was also at night, outside his house, when he claims he saw a larger-than-life raccoon that looked a little more shaggy and unkempt than usual go behind one of his woodsheds, and a few minutes later, a large feral man came out from behind, running off into the distance. He's not exactly sure how to explain it, but also believes that it was a skinwalker. And lastly, my third friend, she claims that she was driving down, right near the border of Nevada, when late at night, she was chased in her car by a coyote of massive size. She said its size almost rivaled that of a horse, and she's not lying. When she told me this story, her eyes began to welt up, and you could see the tears building up. She was terrified, even retelling her experience. She said this massive coyote was keeping up with her car with little effort, even though she was doing at least 75 or 80, and it almost rammed into her car. It would come up to her driver's side door and look at her right in the eye. She said its eyes were very human, and it looked very, very evil. The experience scared her very, very badly, and even now, she has frequent nightmares all throughout the night from this one incident that took place many years ago. There's obviously something going on down here in Southern California, and whatever it is, I believe it's evil. I was what you would consider our family's nomad when I was a child. My parents were migrant workers. However, instead of being taken along with them on their work sites, I always tagged along with my father. Both of us would be gone for weeks at a time. One of the places we would go was West Texas and the Chihuahuan Desert. In fact, we were there so often that I got to know the area pretty well. As I got a little older, I learned more about the paranormal world and began remembering my encounters with paranormal entities. I even remember seeing a dark humanoid figure on two legs standing on the side of the road, almost kind of like a cowboy. When I was a little girl, I remember that getting out to use the restroom was a big ordeal. We had to have to go really far back into the desert to find a spot of relative safety. Often, we would end up going on the side of the interstate. I also remember something coming up to the van that we were once in and looked like a tall black dog, but it was much bigger. It was also incredibly fast and scary looking. My father can remember something that looked like a child, but it walked on two legs and looked very animalistic. I also remember another separate black wolf-like creature, or kind of like a coyote, or a mix of the two. Maybe it was a black coyote, but it had green emerald eyes. I'm not sure if it was before or after the other entity, but I remember it was kind of metallic looking. I also remember that sometimes we'd be out in the middle of nowhere in the desert, and I would just get this deep sense of dread come over me. This primal innate fear that would come out of nowhere. And it was so very bad, it would give me frequent anxiety attacks. It's always stayed with me to this day. That was the last time I ever visited the desert, and much to my regret. I don't really like being in urban areas either though, because there are times that I still get this uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach and like I'm being watched. I can't help but wonder and think that those same beings are following me around no matter where I go, and that I will always be watched, like they are disguising themselves, waiting for the right opportunity to come out and show themselves, to shapeshift and to hide. I was raised in southern Utah, and when I was growing up, we'd often hear stories of skinwalkers. I was in my early 20s when my wife and I experienced something that could only be explained as a skinwalker. We were driving back from a late night in the city of St. George, around 11:30 p.m. We were going north on I-15 when we passed a big field on our right. Something caught my attention in my rearview mirror. It was a pair of yellow glowing eyes. These things were about 20 feet off the road, and multiples of them standing in the middle of the field in the pitch black darkness. They were huge, bright yellow, like a cat's eyes, but they were bigger and more human-like. I immediately thought of a skinwalker and slowed down to see if I could see whatever it was again. My wife began screaming, and she was staring at the passenger window. There was more of them. They were moving towards our car. Huge humanoid figures in the night. I stepped on the gas to get out of there quickly. I've only told a few people about this, and even fewer are actual believers. I have had several encounters and have seen a skinwalker. I have also seen and heard a very large wolf. I believe that these are now the same creature. I have had many encounters, but it only shows itself when I'm alone. I have heard it many times and have also smelt it, the smell of sickly rotting flesh. In south central Utah, I was driving home after dark. I was rounding a curve on the highway and had to slow down to about 20 miles an hour as to not hit a deer that was standing near the middle of the road. I was about 30 yards from the animal when it stood up on its back legs and howled at me. It was a very loud howl, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once. I could see the animal in my headlights, but only for a second. It was all black, standing on its hind legs like a man. The creature was at least 7 feet tall, very muscular, not at all like a bear. It had a wolf-like head and stood on its hind legs like a man. I estimated to weigh at least 400 pounds. I drove the rest of the way home in a panic, fearing that it would follow me or want to come out of the woods on either side of the highway. I was even afraid to stop, even when I got close to my house. I just kept going. I worried that if I stopped now at my home, it would know where I live. So in my head, it was still following me and I had to lose it. Eventually, I drove around for about another hour and a half, and made it home safely. But just a lot of fast maneuvering. I have had several other encounters with this creature. It seems to know when I'm alone, and only shows itself. It seems to like to scare me. I always smell it first, and sometimes will hear it howling in the distance. I've even heard it near my home, and I've also heard it while camping in the mountains. I've seen it near the road, walking through sagebrush, and I've also seen it in the woods following me and my friend. I've seen other animals acting strangely, and I know they're around. The roars kind of sound like that of a large cat, but much deeper and guttural. I've seen large prints while hiking in the area, but have never seen the actual creature, at least not up close. I've heard it though. It seems as though there are different variations of the creature. I've also heard the sounds of other unknown animals that all have this very supernatural feel to them. I'm not exactly sure what's out there. The area is full of rock outcroppings and cliffs. I'm convinced there are several tribes of these creatures. I just hope that I'm not forced to confront the creature that I know exists. I have no doubt that I would lose it.